Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Watch Us Thrive podcast. This is your girl Leanne, and I am so excited to introduce to you guys this week's guest. I was actually a guest on her podcast. When was it? It was February, right? It
I
came out on
believe
Valentine's
so.
Day.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, it came out on Valentine's Day. We're going to link it in the show notes for you guys to check it out. But now she is in the guest seat. This is her first time being a guest, which I'm so excited. I just found out. I love that. So, Roxy, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. You're popping my cherry.
Yes, yes. I've done that a few times, ladies and gentlemen. I'm super excited to have a conversation with you. I'm super excited for people to meet you. Anytime I'm able to collaborate with another podcaster, one, I'm like, thank God, because you know what it is to be a podcaster behind the scenes doing all this shit. So for you to be a guest, like you just sit back, relax, enjoy the ride. Let me take the reins. But, two, we're going to have a real ass conversation around something that I hold really near and dear to my heart. Going to put a trigger warning out now that we are going to talk about domestic violence. If you've been here for a while, you know we talk about this shit 25/8. This is not something that we only speak about 1 month per year. There are so many of us who have gone through these really shitty situations. And this platform is all about turning your pain into power and letting you know that despite what you've gone through, you can overcome it. And that's why I love highlighting guests like Roxy. So before we jump into your story, for anyone who's meeting you for the first time, let them know who you are and what you do.
My name is Roxy. I'm the host of Roxx with Me podcasts. I had another podcast that was a little over a year old before I stopped it. It was called Good Vibes and Thick Thighs. And I decided to venture out on my own podcast, my solo podcast, the Roxx with Me podcast. Leanne was an amazing guest on it. And now I'm super excited to, I guess, return the favor, but I feel like she's doing me the favor in popping my cherry of being a guest.
Oh, stop it. Don't make my head bigger than it already is. No, I'm just playing. Yeah, no, I'm super excited for you to talk about something that so many of us have gone through and for you to be willing to publicly share your story. I just want to say thank you first and foremost before we even get started because it's not easy. It's never easy to hear another woman or man who has gone through some really terrifying moments and times when we thought we weren't going to make it out, especially when it came to being in these types of really abusive, ugly relationships. And I know you were married before. So the floor is yours. You talk about a little bit of what you went through. How did it start? When did you guys meet? And whatever else you want to share with the audience when it comes to that relationship.
Okay. And it's funny because every time I tell a story, I find myself bringing up old memories that I didn't tell previously when I told my story, if that makes sense. And when I was thinking about doing this interview and how I was going to speak about it again, of course, more memories came up. I just finished reading a book called Long Shot, which there's a trigger warning in the beginning of the book because there's a domestic violence relationship in the book that she goes through.
Who's the book by? So we can link it.
Kennedy Ryan. Kennedy Ryan, yeah. I went fangirling because she reposted my little mention of my in my story when I finished her book. But something that really stuck out on that book, because it's very, very well written. It took me a couple pauses, of course, like anything else that speaks on domestic violence, because of you heal from it, but it's still within you. Even though you're healed from it, it's not forgotten. So different things do bring it up where you're like, damn, it's been a while since I felt like that. And that book does represent that part of our stories as well. But one thing it did say was that really stuck to me was where it was like, you have to remind yourself it's not your fault because the blame game on yourself creeps up on you and could basically backpedal you, steps of healing that you've done. But my first marriage, it was emotionally and physically abusive. I think it was more emotional than physical, which a lot of people don't seem to understand that there's different versions of domestic violence that could happen: financial, emotional, physical. The physical, I feel like there's more out there about it. The emotional, I've realized it took me longer to heal from those parts than it did the physical parts. The physical, you get bruises, scratches, cuts, whatever it is, but they heal. Your body like rejuvenates and heals it, and then it's no longer seen or it's a faint scar. Whereas emotionally inside, it's like a burden you carry with.
That shit stays with you so much longer, and I can relate to you so much when you say that because it's an invisible wound that nobody sees, but we are the ones who are suffering through it. Even if it's years out of that relationship, it's still that those words that they say to you, the thoughts, how they made you feel, that shit is it's like emotional warfare that you're trying to battle within yourself. So I completely get it.
Yes, because you start believing that shit because that shit's the only thing you hear. My ex-husband, he didn't drink that much. He had like social drinker beer here and there, like a lot of us do, where we know our limits. So I can't blame the alcohol. You know, people say like you should like little signs of like his personality, not like whew, over my head. I had met him right after high school. He was really good friends with one of my best friends that I had known since like elementary school. So first of all, me and we're no longer friends. But when you know you've known someone since elementary school and you're already in college, you feel like you know their judge of character, right?
Right.
So if they vouch for someone, it's like, okay, like they've known them for a while, like I'm cool with them, they're cool with them, whatever. When I met him, he was in a relationship. Didn't think much of it. It's not like I was trying to pursue something either. It was just like we were at a kickback. He was there with his girlfriend. I was there. And then he friended me on Facebook, accepted it. And then he'd reach out to like for advice, relationship advice. And I feel like that's how he kind of got closer to me because it was that like advice, the friendship, you know, kind of builds. And it's crazy because that time I was only hearing his side, believing his side. So who knows what happened in that relationship? Like I don't know the girl like that to know if anything's had happened. Then there was a part where we were both single. I already had my first kid. I think he was like a year. I was in Texas by that time. He was still in California, where I was born and raised in California. And so we kept long distance friendship type of thing. Then he'd come out and visit me. Then, whenever I would go out and visit family, I'd see him or he'd take me out. And it just, I guess it started through there. I was like, okay, if we're communicating so well in distance, maybe it'll work in person. I was paying for my own phone bill. I was paying for my own shit. Then there was a time where he's like, well, why don't you upgrade to an iPhone? Like, I'll get it under my account. You can keep your number. It's your phone, whatever. You send me what you want. It felt like a mutual friend agreement, like, so I could get the iPhone, you know? Little did I know that would turn out to him later on, him seeing texts, calls, all that, throwing it back in my face, you know,
Mhm.
a sense of control where it caught me off guard when it did happen, you know? He eventually proposed, but even the proposal should have been a huge red flag for me
Hmm.
because
Why? What happened?
so it was one of his visits here coming out here in Texas. We went out to dinner with my family. Like by then my family knew him. We went out to dinner. I didn't realize he had asked my dad's blessing. And my dad just didn't say yes, but just said, it's up to her, you know? Which fast forward because I'm remarried to a great man. And when he asked my dad for the blessing, my dad was like, we've been waiting for you to ask. Like, yes. So complete difference from when the first time. So I didn't know that happened. Then later on, I went to go pick him up from his hotel room so we could go to dinner. But I wasn't feeling well. I didn't want to go to dinner. So I was like, you know what? Let's just hang out here, watch a movie. My kid's taken care of, like, because I'm a huge homebody too. He ends up flipping out. Like, I think that was the first time I saw him flip out like that. He was like, well, you fucked up my plans, blah, blah, blah. He went off and I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, I had reservations. And I was like, it's not like you have to pay if you don't show up. Like, we'll just order fast food. Come. He's like, no, you ruined it. He brought out like the box that had the ring and threw it at me.
Oh, wow. Oh
And
my gosh.
me, I felt guilty because I fucked up the surprise. Then it was me apologizing, even though his reaction was uncalled for. So I said yes. During our time of engagement, I wanted to move in with him before getting married, but I grew up in a really strict Catholic household where you stay a virgin until you get married. You can't move in until you get married. So I was like, okay, fine. We'll get married and then we'll move in, which we did during the time that we were engaged, which was probably a couple months. I think because I was so ready to like want to jump in and move in with him. I didn't do a big engagement period or nothing. It was kind of fast. But by then I had known him for years, so I was like, what's there to it? During one of those times I had went to visit him. We went to a mall, and at the mall we were at like the kids play area, and my kid was playing and he was there, I was there, and then brought out my phone and I was looking through it and I forgot what I was looking up or what, like that's how non-important or I see it. Like I was just on my phone and he flipped out because I wasn't paying attention to him. So he stormed out of the mall. So I get my kid, I'm walking out towards him, and I was like, I'm sorry, I get it. Like, we don't see each other so much because we weren't living together at that time. I was like, it's like I'm wasting, like, again, me feeling guilty. At that time, he grabbed my phone and like threw it to the floor and broke it and was like, find your own way home. But my kid was already in the car seat in the car. And I was like, well, what the fuck do I do? I don't know anybody's number. It's not like back in the day when you only had a home number and you had a memorized number. So I got in the car with him, apologizing, saying it was my fault again. And I feel like it's little instances like that that I look back now, and that was already him starting to brainwash me and mold me and take control over me with
Yes.
me not realizing it.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up because I was literally thinking that when you were saying it. And for the audience, I want you, especially women, I know men can be victims too, but primarily it's women who are the victims and men who are the perpetrators. It's those little minute bursts, outbursts that tend to happen in the beginning that we tend to overlook and be like, oh, maybe he just overreacted. We tend to like rationalize or justify it and just brush it off. But then it happens again. And then he gets angry just a little bit quicker than he did the last time. And it's this slow type of drip that happens when it comes to the tension building phase. If you think about the cycle of abuse, the four parts of it, if you guys don't know what that is, we'll link it in the show notes so you guys can read up on it. But there's four parts of the cycle of abuse, and one of it is the tension building phase. And this is when that shit happens, when you're like starting to walk on eggshells and you're like noticing that he's popping off at the drop of a dime when before it was like the best relationship ever. And it's just these little tiny things that now, us being on the outside of the relationship and really reflecting back, it's like we saw so many of these red flags that we chose to ignore. But this is how it starts to build up. And eventually you will get to the explosion phase, which is the third part, I believe, of the cycle of abuse, where the physical violence tends to happen. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out because it's so true. It's these little tiny things that happen in the beginning. And then when we think back, we're like, holy shit, I saw this shit happening right in front of me and I didn't realize it. So thank you so much for pointing that out because it's something that a lot of us overlook, especially when we're in it. When you're in love, you got the rose colored glasses, you got the blinders on, you just see the good. But he's doing this shit here and there. And it's not until you're out of it, you're like, what the fuck was I thinking? So I appreciate you for sharing that.
No, thank you for recognizing that because it that part of healing did take a while for me to process and get over. Because and what my therapist said was like, you look back now and see their red flags, but in the moment of time, you didn't realize
They
they
are
were
non
red flags.
existent.
Yeah.
No,
So there's no blame at that. You can't go back to that person you were and be like, I should have known. Because a lot of judgment that there is certain times where people will judge the person staying in the relationship and think, well, doesn't this bitch have boundaries? And it's like, yes, we start with boundaries. We start with our guarded heart. But it's like you said, it starts off good. They peel us away. And then when the first thing happens, it's like, okay, I know I wouldn't accept that, but it's the first time. So let me push my boundary a little bit further for me. And it's just little by little, then our boundaries just dissipate, you know?
it's just chipped away little by little. Absolutely.
Yes. So we got married. Even the day we got married in my parents' backyard, and it was just a small backyard wedding by the judge that came. But my gut told me no.
We're gonna get back to that, but yes.
But you know how in the movies they talk about like cold feet? It's normal, blah, blah, blah. So here I am being the Hollywood vision, like, oh, this is normal. I'm supposed to feel like I shouldn't.
Right. And you were young at the time, right? You were in your 20s?
Yeah, I was in my early 20s. I was like 23, I believe. Yeah. 23,
Still a
24.
baby.
Yep. So we went through it just going through the motions. And then I moved in with him. The apartment he rented in California was a 2-bedroom, small living room, kitchen, dining room, whatever. But one of the bedrooms was already taken by his dad, who was retired. So in one bedroom, it was our bed and then a toddler bed for my kid because he was like 1. And I didn't think anything of it because growing up, I mean, my parents had a 2-bedroom apartment growing up. I'm the oldest of 4. We had aunts and uncles coming in, sleeping in the living room, sleeping anywhere. There's a space, and it's just we're accustomed to crowded living, trying to make the American dream happen. So nothing really physical happened at that point. A bunch of little like emotionally draining things, like I mentioned before, where it didn't click to me would happen. I was trying to look for a job, but at the same time, we were trying to conceive our first kid because he wanted the muchies in him wanted to like build a family and legend live on type of blah, 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 right? But I wasn't getting pregnant as fast as he thought. And because I had a child out of wedlock, he was like, well, what the fuck? Like, you were able to do it before. What's going on, It made me feel less of a woman because I'm like, well, I can't produce. Like, something's wrong with me, blah, blah, blah. I went into trying to, like, after sex, put my legs up, like gravity how.
Yeah. You're taking on that guilt and that blame again.
Yeah, exactly. Peeling another layer of me. And growing up, my parents to this day are still married. They've been married for 36 years. I was a straight A student. I was a student athlete, volleyball, basketball, soccer, softball, everything growing up. I was involved in like youth programs and like mentorship and stuff. So it's like, I'm not what people think the stereotypical person of being in an abusive relationship is. So when I finally left, it comes up like, you're not that stupid. Like, what happened? And I'm just living, breathing proof that it could happen to anybody.
Yep. And I appreciate you for sharing that because the same for me. Like, my parents have been together for 40 something years, didn't grow up in a home that was violent. There was no abuse. There was no emotional, verbal abuse. Like, no. But I was in an abusive relationship too. So I appreciate you for sharing that because there is this stereotypical, if you grew up in a violent home, of course you're gonna repeat the cycle. We have 2 people right here who never grew up in that shit, but we experienced it. So, like you said, it can happen to anyone. So fuck your stigmas, okay?
Yes. And kudos to you and me because we started and ended the cycle with us.
Yep. Amen. Yes, kudos to us, okay? But anyway, this is about you, so back to you.
So I found a job in the process of trying to get pregnant. And if you've been to California, California traffic is infamous. Like
It's
fucking parking
ghetto.
lot. Yeah. I
And
do
I'm from
not
the
miss.
East Coast, okay?
Yeah. Like a 20-minute drive turns into like an hour and a half because of traffic.
On a normal day.
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, my job was 20 minutes away. It was a good job. I was working in the financial department of a health insurance. And so it was a good paying job. The start pay was more than minimum. And in California, it's like you need what you could get because it's California. So driving home obviously would take me more than the 20 minutes it's the GPS says it could take. So if I was like off by 10 minutes, he'd think I was having an affair. He'd think I was cheating on him. He'd think I was staying after to talk to someone. Like, I can't even stop to piss after I get out without worrying like he's going to say something. During the times that we were together, if I was on my phone too long, he'd think something else. Like, we're in an era where everything's accessible through our phones. Like, it's hard not to be on our phones, where sometimes we even need to be like, oh, fuck, like, I need a break. Put my phone aside type of shit. But for him, it was, oh, I'm doing something behind his back. Like, I'm plotting me leaving, blah, 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 whatever. I'm cheating on him. But it wasn't even the case. It was like fucking text messages of coupons and deals.
And it's usually them who are doing the shit behind your back, and they're projecting their shit onto you because the same fucking thing happened to me. He cheated on me throughout the entire relationship, but I was the one being accused. Like, you're doing this shit, and blah, 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 blah. No, fuck you, okay? It's all about that manipulation, tactical bullshit of control and power. And, ugh, there's so many similarities, and that's why I appreciate having these conversations, because there's so many things that we can relate to when we share our stories. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, yeah, we're not alone. Like, I hear other stories and I'm like, I see myself in other survivors and other stories. It's like, I know the feeling. Like, where when you hear someone else, it's like a no judgment zone type of thing. Where someone who's been blessed not to go through something like this, it doesn't surprise me when they are judgmental about it or when they do make their assumptions or question why didn't you leave before type of thing. One thing I was probably like the smartest about was my bank account. Since we were married, he wanted a joint bank account. And I was like, no, no, I can't close mine. They're giving me a really good deal because I've had it since I was like 16. So that's an excuse you all could use. That was a blessing in disguise for when I left. And then when I got pregnant, it was like I was with the company I was working for less than a year. So it's not like I was eligible for the whole period of like FMLA type of thing. It's the shortened ADA type of stuff because you're fairly new, you haven't worked a year. So I remember when I got pregnant, I was scared to tell my parents. And I was like, but I'm married. I'm going through the steps you're supposed to. Why am I scared to tell this to my parents? And again, that's probably another gut feeling about it, you know?
Yep, that intuition.
So when I did call my parents to tell them I was pregnant, I didn't hear so much excitement from them either. And I was like, well, maybe because it's too soon, because it was less than a year we were married that I got pregnant. But it was long enough to the point where he had me doubting, like, my body works. But during the pregnancy is when he started getting physical, which is weird because it's like, I'm carrying your son. Isn't this what you wanted? That part was scary to the point where, and God forgive me, I would think like, I don't want to have this baby and be stuck to him for 18 years because it started with him like pushing me, him like doing things where like you shouldn't do to a woman, let alone a pregnant woman that's delicate, you know?
Right.
And they say when you're pregnant, like the baby feels your emotion and your stress. So you're not supposed to be stressed out. And boy, was I stressed out. And my youngest son, he had such an attitude in his little toddler ages where I feel like that was my fault because I was crying, I was stressed the fuck out. I was like contemplating whether I wanted him or not, you know? Because our family was growing, I was like, we don't have room for a crib and the toddler bed and our bed and everything in our room. Like, so I told him, I was like, why don't we help your dad look for a place, like a studio apartment or something? He flipped that against me. And you would think like, oh, well, his dad lived with you guys. Like, wouldn't he stop him? There was one time I was in the living room. I forgot what he was complaining about. It was probably some shit of me being on my phone or something, because that seemed to be like the ongoing
A trigger
topic.
for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the entrance of our home, there was like a little table with stuff on it. And one of the things on it was this like big stick, walking stick. And that night he grabbed it and started beating me with it. I remember being like my legs up on the couch with me, kind of kneeled in and trying to like block myself. And I guess for me crying and stuff, his dad came into the room, saw him with the stick in his hand, saw me in tears, like, you know, and I thought, okay, good, he's going to say something. He did. He said, "What are you doing? You need to stop." He said it in Spanish. And my ex-husband was just like, "Get back to your room before I beat your ass too." And his dad just turned around and went back to his room, closed the door like nothing happened. So it's
Jesus
like,
Christ.
what the fuck? What am I supposed to do? I guess it's normal. That was one of the physical moments where I still like remember, because a lot of the physical things I've forgotten throughout the years. Because again, like I said, mentioned it earlier, like the physical hurt, kind of like I was healed from it because I don't have reminders everywhere. But the emotional, that's what still gets to me. And this is gonna sound like so silly to some, but I'm pretty sure it saved me in some instances, because there would be times where I'd be standing in front of him and he'd start with his temper tantrums and start yelling at me and stuff. I'd pee myself to get away from it. And that's something I had forgotten until I was like, okay, I'm going to tell my story on this podcast with Leanne. Like, let me start. Because again, these are memories that I suppress, right?
Right.
So when I'm preparing for this to tell my story again, I'm like, okay, let me open up that box that like I try not to. And this was a memory I had forgotten. Like, I share my story on one of my episodes of my podcast, and I didn't even mention this on that. Like, it's something that I just like it came up again, digging through old memories. So yeah, I literally pissed myself so that he would be disgusted. We wouldn't have to have sex at night. I'd be able to go shower and be alone for a little bit. So when I suggested his dad move out so we could have room for the baby, he flipped out because he made it seem like I didn't want nothing to do with his family. And the baby was born, so we had the crib, the toddler bed, and our bed in one small ass bedroom. His parents are divorced. His mom was already remarried with like this big ass house. So when we would go visit them, we'd go visit them and I'd still feel kind of awkward because I was like, well, if his dad's not going to say anything, what is his mom going to do? There was one time on the way to his mom's house, I was sitting in the back with our baby and my son. And so he was in the front. And I guess I had said something that offended him. I think it was the fact that I was bringing up the whole, we should help your dad move out. It was at a red light. He turned around and he reached back over to like grab me, and he pinched me so hard that it gave me like a cut. Like I was like, there was blood. And I was so obviously the pain from that, I was crying. Then when we got to his mom's house, she sees me and she's like, "What happened? What did you do?" And I'm like, okay, so this really isn't going anywhere with his parents and his family. Another instance was he got really mad where he knocked over this like bookshelf where we kept like the baby's formula, the diapers, and all that. He had knocked that over in anger. And then his sister had shown up like a surprise visit. And I stayed in the room because I was in tears. And I was already embarrassed because his dad didn't do anything. His mom didn't say anything. So I was in bedroom still like, and I hear yelling. I don't know what they're arguing about. And then she comes and she looks at like what's going on. Like she sees the thing like knocked over, all the shit everywhere, me crying in the bedroom. And the thing I remember her saying is like, "Watch, I'm gonna call CPS and have the kids taken away from you guys." And I'm like, what the fuck? Am I the problem too? Like, but after the baby was born, I was on maternity leave for the short amount of time because I hadn't been a year with the company. The day I returned to work, because I wasn't getting paid, I didn't have short term disability, nothing. He had got injured during that time I was off work, and he had like tore, I think his ACL or something, where he needed surgery. Well, his scheduled surgery was the day I was scheduled to return to work. And like, bro, we need this money. Like, you're not working, I'm not working. I need to get back to it. And that turned into an argument because I wasn't the one that took him to get his surgery, even though it was an outpatient procedure. Like, he didn't have to stay overnight. He didn't have to, like, nothing. It was like he was in and out within hours. His sister took him, brought him home. And then I came home from work after my first day back at work. And he was pissed because I wasn't there supporting him.
And again, it was your fault.
Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm fucking this up. Like, and because I grew up in a Catholic household, because I saw my parents like make it so far in their marriage and like stuff like that, I was like, I'm not a quitter. I need to make this work. I need to make this work for my kids. I need to show them like we're a family unit and we get through shit type of thing. Not knowing that they were tainted in the process of me staying, regardless of whether they were put away, if they were like in their room when instances happened where I thought it happened past their bedtime, where they didn't like know what was going on or whatever. But my oldest does remember some things. My youngest, when I left, it was before he turned 1, so he doesn't really remember. But my oldest, he would bring it up after I had left, like, "Why would you let him hurt you?" And I'm like, "Fuck," hearing that from a little kid, like, damn, he's smarter than I am. Like, why did I?
Right. So can you talk a little bit about, because I don't wanna focus too much on, like, what you went through. That's very hard to listen to, and I know it's hard for you to have to relive it, and that's not what this podcast is about. I wanna focus more on, like, life afterwards and you deciding to walk away and start the rebuilding process of leaving. So talk a little bit about, like, what that was like. When did you decide, "Enough, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore," and then how did you start the rebuilding process after leaving?
So the day I decided to leave, it wasn't as if I was planning it. It felt like an outer body experience because it was like something in me pushed myself to do something. It was a typical temper tantrum. He grabbed my phone and he was trying to look through it to try to find something, which he never found anything, but still, I got the shit end of the stick. He put the phone on the counter because he wanted to turn around and go close the front door so the neighbors wouldn't hear. And in that instance, him walking to the front door to close it felt like forever. It felt like my life was going in slow motion because he left the phone behind, which he never does. And I was like, this is my chance. Like, I could grab the phone, go into the boys' room where they're playing, lock it, call 911, all that. And I'm like, okay. But then I was like, it was a battle within me because he hadn't hit me yet. So what were they going to do? Like, there was no disturbance yet. So what was I going to tell on? But I don't know what got into me that I grabbed the phone, ran into my boys' room, closed the door because it was already after his dad had finally had moved out and stuff, so the boys had their own room. And I locked the door, and I guess I startled them to the point where my youngest started crying, and my oldest was like, "What's going on?" And then I called 911, giving him, his information, saying like, "I'm scared for my life. He's hurt me before, and he's angry right now that I feel like he's gonna kill me." Those were my exact words. Which is hard to admit because it's like, when did it get to that point?
Mm, I'm so fucking proud of you.
Thank you. See, as many times as I say the story, that part still gets me
It's okay.
because a lot of people in those type of situations aren't as lucky as we are. So the 911 operator asked for his information. I gave it to them. And then they're like, well, do you know he has a warrant? And I was like, what the fuck? I was like, no. And then they're like, so yeah, he has a warrant, but we're having the sheriff go to your house. And like, he was knocking on the door and blah, 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 saying all this shit, profanity, threatening me my life. And I guess he didn't realize I was on the phone with the 911 operator. That once he heard me talking to someone, it was like a flip of the switch. Come on, you're overreacting. Everything's fine. Trying to sweet talk so the person on the other line can believe him over me. I don't know what happened when the sheriff got there. I stayed in the room, stayed on the phone because they're like, don't open the door until you hear that it's the sheriff. I was like, okay. They came in and then they're like, we have him outside. Did he hit you? And I was like, not this time. But obviously, there's holes in the walls. There's evidence in that house telling my story that they were used to. And they even told me, they're like, do you want to leave? And I said, yes, if I have the chance, I do. And then they're like, okay. They offered me an emergency protective order. And they said, we're going to take him in for the warrant he has. We don't know how long it's going to hold. So we don't know if he'll be released tonight, tomorrow, in a couple days, but we're taking him in. And so if you want to leave, this is your chance. And I was like, done. I had a lot of like jerseys. I'm a sports girl. I had a lot of jerseys. I had Jordans. I had like a shitload of movies because back then, put on a DVD. I had my collection of movies. I had like,
It was your life.
yeah.
Yeah, it was your life in that apartment.
So I just grabbed a couple clothes for the boys. I think I packed more for them than I did for myself. And then I packed,
Typical mom.
yeah, they look better than we do. Like,
Right.
and I packed this folder that had all the important documents. Luckily, I was very organized and had everything in one place where I didn't have to go searching. So I took that and I was like, he's going to come out super pissed at me. And at that point, I was already working from home, his suggestion. So I disconnected all my work at home equipment, threw it in the trunk too, because I was like, there's no way I'm going to leave this here and it come back to bite me in the ass because he's done something to it. I called my aunt, she didn't answer. I called my cousin, she didn't answer because this happened right like the day after Christmas. And then I was going like calling. I have a big family, a lot of cousins. So finally, one of my cousins answered. She let me go. I was contemplating whether to stay in California or come because my parents were still here in Texas. So I made the drive, me and the two boys by myself, the 12-hour drive out here. And my parents took me in, no questions asked. I thought that was the hardest part, but no. It just feels like instead of coming out of this hole you dug yourself from being in this relationship, it feels like the reach to the top is getting further and further away once you leave.
Yeah. And that's something that we don't talk about enough because I think a lot of people who haven't been in it, who can't relate to what we went through, they have this thought of like, well, why don't you just leave? Why would you stay if it was really that bad? And y'all don't realize, unless you've experienced it or you know someone close to you who has gone through it, yes, it's beautiful to be able to close that violent, horrible chapter, but what comes after is not an easy feat for us to go through, especially if you don't have support. Thank God you had your family. Thank God I had my family because if I didn't, I probably wouldn't be here today, truth be told. And it's just another level that you have to now deal with, especially if you're married, especially if you have kids. For me, I didn't have any ties to my ex. Thank God. But it's just you don't really realize of how much it takes for you to start the rebuilding process. It's not rainbows and butterflies and like, the fucking movie Enough with J-Lo and she becomes this strong, powerful woman. Like, no, that is not the reality. That is the Hollywood version that people think of what it's like after leaving. But there's so much pain that you have to deal with, not just healing from the physical that you've gone through. Like we said before, the fucking emotional turmoil that you have to work through. That's why it's so important to lean on support, to go to therapy, to hire coaches, to do whatever it is that you need to do to get yourself back to a point where you start to feel like yourself again. Because I'm sure you can relate. You didn't know who the fuck you were when you were in that relationship. I had no idea who I was when I left my last relationship. And it took a lot of ugly feelings for me to feel in order for me to now be this woman who can sit here and talk about it and not shed a tear and be able to listen to someone else's story and feel what they're feeling. But it's not fucking easy. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, that it's like the process of rebuilding after leaving a relationship is one of the hardest things that you will go through. And we need to normalize that that's not fucking normal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, especially because you hear it all the time. The statistics, it takes how many times for someone to actually leave for good? Like up to 7 times. And I feel like me myself, if I would have like stayed in California, it would have been so easy for him to manipulate me to come back. Because when I left, there were voicemails, there were emails, there were text messages of how sorry he was, how much he missed me, how much he missed the boys, like how it's never going to happen again. And it wasn't as easy as me going around the corner and going back to him. No, we were fucking 2 states across from each other,
Yes.
like
That's why I left from Florida to New Jersey. Like I had to travel over 1,000 miles away and he had to be put in prison because I'm sure I would have went back if I would have stayed in that same vicinity with him. I knowing who I was back then, I would have went back. So I feel you.
that's why if like the people that been blessed not to go through something like this, if they know someone that's left and that opens up to them, like don't judge them and give them that open, healthy, safe space to help them not go back because it's fucking hard to stay away. You know that song from Gwen Stefani? It was right after her divorce. She talks about how it's hard because even though she's leaving a shitload of things behind, the hardest part is that there was once upon a time ago where she did love him. And people don't get that even though we get away from the relationship and we're so blessed that we've escaped and survived, a part of us is still grieving the good parts that we held onto for so long that kept us in that relationship for so long.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because it makes me think about when I first left that relationship and he was in jail. There was so much guilt that I felt because I was the one who called 911. I was the one who put him in prison. I missed him even though he tried to kill me. And it's like, it's a mental mindfuck that you won't really understand unless you go through it. But like having those feelings of like, oh my God, this person tried to kill me, but I still love him and I miss him and I'm sad and I'm angry and I'm scared. And you're reminiscing about how beautiful it was in the beginning and how the sex was amazing and how you spent every waking moment with this person. Because when I was in my relationship, it was during COVID. So we were fucking locked down. It was just me and him 25/8. And then all of these things, like you're just thinking all of these emotions, just like, what the fuck? How did we get here? And that's the part that I still, to this day, it's 3 years since going through that, almost losing my life, him being in prison. And it's just like, yo, I can't believe that this is my fucking life and this is what I went through. And it's a battle of going back and forth. It's just like, holy shit. Like, what the fuck? We didn't plan to be in these types of abusive relationships and marriages. We didn't think that it would ever get to this point, but unfortunately it did. And it's just not easy with all the emotions that come up throughout the healing process, the good and the bad. And I want to ask you, do you still have triggers that come up for you? Because I know that's something that a lot of us survivors or victims, whatever you want to call yourself, go through. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I absolutely still have triggers that come up. The dreams, those are the worst. So I want to know, do you still have triggers that come up and how do you work through them? And what would be some advice that you would share with someone who is still struggling with the emotions that we dealt with, especially after leaving and doing the healing and all of that?
So after I left, it was hard to feel like I was safe, even though we had states and miles between us. I had started a new job a couple months after, and driving home, like people probably would think I was psycho because I would take different routes home to make sure nobody was following me because I thought he's gonna come get me, he's gonna come find me.
I feel like I'm looking in the mirror because I literally felt the same way in the beginning. I felt like every fucking car that followed me for like a block too long, he sent someone after me to finish what he started. Like the paranoia is crazy that we don't talk about enough too. Oh my God, I feel so seen. This is why I love talking about this with other people because you feel fucking crazy, right? You feel like, oh my God, I'm the only one thinking it. And then when you hear someone else, it's like, holy shit, me too. So go ahead. I just had to, I was
Yeah,
like, yo, I feel so fucking seen right
yeah.
now.
So that was something I had to like recognize that he wasn't gonna come get me. And that took a while. He had the car I was driving around repossessed, but before that he marked it as stolen, where that was fun to like clean up. He called CPS on me, which that was something else that was fun. I think that part of him calling CPS and me having to go through that and prove that I was a good mother really fucked me over to the point to this day. That's something that still comes up where I'm like, how could I discipline my
Mm.
child without getting in trouble? Especially in today's world where I grew up with getting like slapped,
I got my ass
discipline.
beat growing up, okay? Yes.
Yeah. So it's like now you could get in trouble for that, you know? And my freedom versary, as I call it, was December of 2014. So it's been years. 3 years after that, my kids were in elementary school. They like a year and a half apart, and they're boys. They fight, they throw shit at each other. My oldest went to school with a cut near his eye because my youngest threw a book at him when they were fighting. When I go pick him up from school, the teacher pulls me aside, asks if everything's okay, because they asked him, Mijo, what happened to your eye? Like, how did it get cut? And each time they would ask him, his story would change. So that was a red flag for them. So when I got pulled to be asked about that, I'm like, fuck, here we go again, you know? Who knows if they could look at my past and see this wouldn't be the first time I get reported? Who knows how much harder it would be to like prove I'm a good mother, you know? So that's something that I'm still very fearful of. And it's not exactly because of him, but it's because of that fear of the thought of losing my kids, you know? But I went to therapy because I knew something was right. Nobody understood me. I was very misunderstood. I went through a whole stage. I was trying to go for sex to kind of get my mind off of shit, to try to feel wanted kind of thing, looking in the wrong places.
That doesn't work, guys, okay?
No, I
I
was
went
just
through the
gonna
same
say
thing too. It does
it
not
doesn't
work.
work. I mean, it's fun, but it doesn't work.
Right. Eventually, you're gonna have to deal with your shit, okay?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I was like, okay, let me look into therapy. I didn't look into therapy until COVID, which what was it? We were in 2020, I think. So that was already more than 5 years that I finally decided, okay, I need to get some shit done. I quit two therapists because I had some resentment towards my own family. Because when they would go to California, they would never come to my house. And so it added fuel to the fire of me thinking, nobody fucking cares for me. When in reality, it wasn't me that they were avoiding, it was him. So the first therapist I quit because it felt like she was taking my mom's side and that she made it seem like I needed to be more understanding. And then I was like, what the fuck? Like, did you not hear what I went through? So I changed therapists. The second therapist, I quit because she called me by the wrong name. So I was like, what connection are we having? Like, no, you're not hearing me if you can't remember my name, at least for the hour that we're meeting. Therapist finally really started working with me and I felt like I was getting somewhere. And I think it was also a part of me was really, really trying because that's when I started dating my now husband, who he was God sent. He was so patient. I literally thought he was just going to be a one night stand, and he knows that that was my impression that what we had. But when I say survivor of the fittest, like he's living proof of it because he was so patient. He was persistent, but not persistent enough where it felt like I was going to be trapped again. He gave me my space, but also was patient with me because he knew because I opened up to him with my story. And the reason I opened up to him was more of a defense mechanism, like who's gonna want a broken ass person? Not thinking like it didn't scare him.
Shout out to hubby. We love that, okay? Shout out to you. What's his name?
Sherman.
Shout out to Sherman. Yes, we love that.
And the way he is with my boys, the way he is as a father to his daughter, it came in perfect timing. And he understood I still had things to work on. And he gives me my space to work on things. He gives me my space to be me. Because he always reminds me, like, I'm not taming you. You're wild, you're free. Like, you are you. I am me. Like, it's okay to have separate hobbies and be our own person. Like, we don't have to like drown in each other, which is something I thought love was. Like, you become one, which no, you just become two separate people that are in love and make a union. You don't become one because then you lose yourself. And that's what a lot of people search for when they're looking for relationships, like someone to complete them. And I had dated before him and I was looking for someone to complete me, which is probably why it failed because it was like I needed to understand I'm already complete. So the advice I would give to people, because there are times in my relationship we've been married since December. We were engaged for a year and we were together for like 3 years before that. We met before COVID. And I think that's what wanted me to fix myself because of how he wanted to love me and I wasn't ready for that. There's no timeline that you need in order to heal. Like once you're out of the relationship, you don't need to go straight to therapy. It took me fucking 5 years to realize I needed therapy. Like it comes in your own time. Because if you start too soon when you're not ready, it's not going to be as effective because you're going to still be blocking shit out, thinking like, no, that's not it. So the biggest thing is to be patient with yourself. And like I mentioned at the beginning from that book from Kennedy Ryan, The Long Shot, how it says the fault that you feel will creep up on you and it'll take you back like from the healing stages. And you just got to remind yourself that you are strong. Your body is yours. You have the choice whether to give it to someone or not. Like you have that power. And once you find that power, don't give it up so easily.
Absolutely. I want to ask you, since we are on the advice, what would you tell someone who is currently in an abusive relationship and they have this thought of wanting to leave, but they're scared to? What would you tell that person in order to finally make the decision to walk away?
That fear is not going to go away. If you wanting to leave, will never go away either. So it's really just like I had my on the last day, I had a battle within myself. Like, would it be worth me leaving or not? Like, there's resources out there that you can call, you can chat in, you can text. Even when you go into the National Domestic Violence Hotline.org, I think that's what the website is. There's a space where anytime you're on it, you click a button and it goes straight to Google. And it's like, I didn't realize that until after the fact, where I thought, like, oh, it's not going to be as easy as like going to a different app. And then if he opens that app, he's going to see it. Like, it literally has a button that redirects the web page. If you are wanting to leave, it takes a village, it takes a support system. Find your support system. And as hard as it is to trust people because of what you're going through, at least trust that one person that will help you once you're ready to step out the door. And that's why it's so important for those that are the ones that they reach out to, not to be like, oh, well, this bitch never leaves. Like, I'm tired of hearing her. She wants to leave. She wants to leave. Like, and like stopping them. Like, no, be considerate and know that, okay, it's going to take some time, but now that you're aware, don't force them because you don't want to push them away either. But at the same time, be ready for when they are ready.
Yes. And I think it's so important for people on the outside to reinforce that narrative that, like, even if you have someone in your life who they've gone and came back, left and came back, and they repeated that cycle. Like we said before, the average number of times is 7, which is, I believe it's a lot more than 7, right? But just letting that person know, no matter what, when you decide, because at the end of the day, no one can make you do anything that you don't want to do when it comes to leaving that relationship, and it's so hard to make that decision because there's so many factors. What if I can't afford it? I have kids or married. No one believes it. But like there's so many things, right? But once you decide to be like, I'm done, like you said, leaning on the support, even if it's just one person. When I finally decided to leave, I mean, it really happened out of my control. If you guys want to hear my story, it's episode 19 on the podcast. No, episode 12. I don't know. I'm going to link it in the show notes for you guys to listen to it. My story was very dramatic when it came to leaving, but I leaned on one of my best friends. Shout out to Giovanna, went to her apartment, and that was the first time I told someone what was going on. And that started my healing process by just speaking up and telling one person, just one person that I trusted. And I know it's difficult, it's scary, it's like, holy shit, this is you, like you said, saying it out loud makes it real, but let that be the power to be like, I fucking said it, and now I'm going to start the process of what it takes to heal from this shit. I'm taking away the power from that person and putting it back into myself by speaking my truth. That's why I think it's so important for us to have these types of narratives, have people like you come on to bravely share your story. I want to just say thank you so much for going as deep as you did, because you didn't need to. You need to be detailed and talk about the shit that you went through, but you really painted a vivid picture of the reality of what so many people go through that haven't been able to find the strength within themselves to talk about it. So I want to give you your flowers. I want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing your truth and providing value for people who are the old versions, are living right now, the old versions of what we went through, right? So I want to end on a positive note, since you are on the Watch Us Thrive podcast, being the woman that you are with all the things that you've gone through. What is your definition of thriving?
I think that feeling you get when you let your hair down and you dance to the beat of your own drum and you like your spirit, I think that's where you feel safe enough to do that. You're thriving. Even if you haven't been through shit, even though you haven't been through trauma, whether it be big T trauma, little T trauma, whatever, and you have that joy of being able to like let your hair loose, fucking sing your heart out, dance. Cause for me, music is like, I love dancing. You're thriving because you have that opportunity to do so. Something so simple, but yet so meaningful.
Yes, especially going through what you went through and just thinking back to who you were compared to who you are now. I just give you so much grace and so much compassion and so much thanks for you coming on again to share your story. And I know people are going to want to know more about you and follow you and listen to your podcast. So plug that all in and any last words you want to leave the people with.
So, Roxx with Me podcast, it's on all major podcast platforms. I started it on one of my covers. I use two separate covers for that podcast because one, on my solo episodes, I just talk about anything that I fucking think of, books, crime, whatever it is that I feel like thinking about and expressing myself. And then episodes where I have guests like you come on and share your story of, it's really just a platform for people to share their story of resilience because I feel like all of us are like lotus flowers where those motherfuckers go through fucking mud and still bloom so beautifully. And that's something we need to remind ourselves. We may go through shit day to day, but tomorrow's a new day. You're going to shine bright. Cry it out today. Be muddy with your tears if you want. Come tomorrow is a new fresh start where you have the opportunity to blossom again like a lotus flower. So I'm on Instagram, Rocks With Me podcast. I'm sure Leanne will put it in the show notes. And I'm like 15 episodes released, so it's still baby project, but it's getting there.
It's okay. It's okay. We all start from somewhere, right?
Yeah, I want to get on your level where you forgot what episode you shared your story. You have so many episodes, and they all have super amazing gems in each one of them. And I commend you for the space you've given people to share their story because this is still, even though it happens so often, even after the Me Too movement, even after all these things that are coming out, it's still something that people feel uncomfortable talking about. But like you say, it's shit that needs to be talked about. You say it yourself.
Yes, it's shit that we're going to continue putting in your face to normalize that it's not normal. And this is why I love bringing on fellow survivors, especially of DV, on the show, because we only see it in people's faces during October, which I love. I mean, I'm not going to discredit that, but that does get overshadowed by Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And when it comes to DV, this is something that so many of us are going through on a daily basis. There's so many of us who don't survive the abuse, and there's so many of us who are suffering in silence. And I want this platform to be the safest space where you are going to hear survivor stories like Roxy's and be able to see, despite the shit that she has gone through, look at her now and let that motivate you to be like, I'm going to be like that too. Like she's giving me permission to take my power back because look at what she went through. Look at what Leanne went through. Look at what all these people who've come on to share their stories went through. And they didn't allow them to stay stuck in the mud, like you said. So shout out to us. We are breaking the cycle. We are normalizing the ugly shit. We're going to continue putting it in your face. I just, again, want to say thank you so much. I'm going to link all her info in the show notes. And yes, until next time, this is your girl Leanne of the Watch Us Thrive podcast. Keep glowing, growing, and thriving.